Scott Furlot. Welcome to this video, Forensic Psychology. Yeah. The content of the slides of this video come from the 6th edition of Forensic Psychology by Joanna Posel. And today in this video, we're going to talk about eyewitness testimony. So we're going to talk about the process of memory, so the cognitive process of how do we take in information and how do we remember it, and then how do we retrieve it, how do we bring it out again. We're going to talk about some forensic procedures that investigators use to help witnesses and include victims and witnesses remember and bring out and retrieve those memories. We're going to talk about lineups, which is one of the procedures that investigators use to help with recognition of offenders. And we'll talk about some considerations regarding children as witnesses. So there's developmental cognitive differences that are worth talking about. So before we begin, I'm going to give you another definition to consider. So you've likely heard this word before, subpoena. So subpoena is a form of a warrant. So if you remember what a warrant is, it's an order from the judge. So you're compelled, you have to do whatever that warrant states. So a subpoena is used as a form of a warrant to compel a witness who has evidence that can assist the triers of fact, so assist the judge or the jury, to show up in court. So if somebody is a witness to an event, they have some information, the judge says they have to come and tell us their story. They still have the right to remain silent, but they still have to show up in court. They would issue a subpoena, which means then that you do have to show up in court. So that's different than a summons, which is, you could call that another form of warrant. So a summons is to an accused. So if you're accused of an offense and they need to make you come to court, they would issue a summons, which again is a different type of warrant. So subpoena and summonses, you'll hear those words in the criminal justice system a lot. Subpoena is for a witness, summons is for the accused. It's a good way to keep them straight. So let's talk about memory and the process of memory. So how do we kind of take in this information and then what happens to it? How do we retrieve it? This sort of thing. So eyewitness testimony to an incident, it relies on what they remember at the event. So you may be there, but everybody's going to perceive things differently. Everybody's going to remember things differently. And it really depends on what's happening during that process of memory. So I'll bring these all up. So something has to get our attention. So it's that perception of the event. So something has to draw our attention enough that our senses, all of our senses, are taking in that information of whatever this is that now has our attention. So we know in our daily life, kind of the more routine things are, the more times we're exposed to a certain stimulus, we become accustomed to that. We adapt to it. So my guess is if you're on campus at Acadia, you can probably walk from the BAC back to wherever you live, put your headphones in, and you can probably do it blindfold. That you've done it so much, you're so used to that stimuli, you may not notice certain things. You can just do it without even necessarily giving the world or your environment a lot of your attention. And that is the case. The more we're exposed to something, and if our brain determines that, okay, this is a safe thing, I don't have to pay a lot of attention to it, we tend to adapt to that, and we tend to kind of just zone out, I guess, is another way of saying it. So oftentimes, there may be things happening in our environment we don't even notice. But again, it comes back to this sort of primal need or instinct, I guess, around safety. So if there's something novel in the environment, it's going to get our attention. Like, we're going to pay attention to it, or at least for a moment. So think about if you're in a restaurant or something, in a server drops a plate. Everybody turns, looks, okay, your brain says this is safe, this is nothing, and then you go back to doing what you're doing. I could ask you, what color are the floors in the Huggins Science Center? And many of you have been there 100 times, but you'd have to stop and think, well, I'm not even sure. And I have to be honest, I'm not even sure right now what color they are. I think they're like a kind of a stone, kind of mixed stone thing, but I can't say for certain. And I've been there 100 times. But we don't need to know that. We don't need to pay attention to that because it's safe. We don't need to use our mental capacity to kind of take notice of that. So what's getting our attention? Again, something that's novel in the environment usually is going to take our attention until such point as we determine, do we need to pay attention to this or not? So whatever that stimuli is, it comes in. So there's that sensory memory, which is just there seconds, so long enough for that information to pass through our sensory neurons to go to our brains, whether it be a smell, something we see, hear, touch, whatever. Then it goes into our short-term memory, and then that's when our brain decides, okay, do I need to keep this? And that's encoding. So, do I need to store this, and how do I store this? And with encoding, I mean, how that gets saved, there's things that can interfere with that. So like what else is happening in the environment? Are there other distractions? What's your own cognitive sort of process for memory like? Are you under the influence of something that's interfering with your capacity to encode this in a proper way? So encoding is it gets saved. So think of this process almost like you're saving files on your desktop. So do I need to save this document? How do I save it? What label do I put on it? How do I word it? What folder do I put it in? So that's kind of similar to this process. Your brain is saying, okay, where do I save this? How do I save it? Then that goes into our long-term memory. So it's in there, it's saved. But the hard part is retrieval. How do I bring it back out again? So again, think of using this sort of desktop metaphor. You may be looking for an assignment you've been working on, and you say, where did I put this? What did I save this under? Like, what did I label it? Like, how can I find this? So retrieval is similar to that. So like, it's in there. I witnessed this thing. I saw this thing. I experienced it, but how do I bring it out? And problems can occur at any one of these stages. So whether it be the attention, like are you kind of paying enough attention to notice this? Are there issues with how it's being saved, how it's being encoded in your brain, and then bringing that back out again? That can be difficult. So problems can happen at any one of these stages, but that's the general stage for any memory. And when it comes to retrieval, we tend to break this down into two parts, so recall and recognition. So recall is just pulling it out. So it's in there, I can remember it. So if you have something in your long-term memory, you can say, okay, yeah, I can pull this out. That's recall. Recognition is seeing something and then saying, okay, now I remember. So maybe you misplaced your phone or your keys or something, and you're like, I'm going to retrace my steps. So you retrace your steps, so it's that recognition of the environment, which then helps prompt that memory come out. So procedures are based on these two things. So helping people with recall, so just kind of bringing it out cognitively, or recognition, so giving somebody some stimuli so that it prompts that retrieval of the memory. Okay, so recall, recognition. So with recall, some of the procedures around that and ways to do it is really just this sort of open-ended recall. So just tell me what happened. Tell us everything you know about this. So it's really just that open-ended, pull out whatever you can pull out. And then there's the direct question. So where you're going to be asked specific questions, right? So you give the direct, I saw somebody, smash the window out, or I heard the smash, and then I saw somebody running down the street, and then I called the police. So then direct question is, what was the person wearing? Tell me what they looked like. So more specific questions, open-ended, is the person just talking and trying to pull out as much as they can. Direct question, you're asking specific questions, and then you're going to examine that, because again, problems can happen with at any point during those memory stages. So then you're going to what the investigator would do is compare that to other evidence they have. So, is it accurate? What are they talking about? How does this compare to other things that we already know? Okay. Because again, depending on that person's processes, depending on like all of those stages, what's happening in all those stages, the accuracy can be different. So three sort of ways of kind of getting there and using these two forms as far as recall goes is hypnosis, the cognitive interview, and the enhanced cognitive interview. So I'll talk a bit about these three. So hypnosis, we all know what hypnosis is. Maybe some of you have been hypnotized before, but hypnosis is getting into this cognitive state where you're more relaxed, maybe more susceptible to suggestion. We all know what hypnosis is. Two techniques that are used in the forensic context is age regression. So particularly if the incident or the event is historical, so say for example somebody witnessed something when they were 13 years old, or they were a victim of something when they were 13 years old. So hypnosis would be used to get this person into this, I don't want to say trance-like, but relaxed state, taking them back to the age of the event. So putting them back into that cognitively, I guess, into that environment, and then asking them questions while they are in that regressed state. The other technique is a television technique. So this is, again, the person is in this hypnotic state, and then ask them questions, or ask them to recall these events as if they're watching it like on a screen, as if they're watching a movie. So it gives a bit of that dissociation, looking at it from that sort of outside perspective. But those are the two main sort of forensic techniques as related to hypnosis. It can be useful. Again, you think of this witnessing any event, it is emotionally provocative. Again, those emotions and our emotional state, that's going to interfere with that memory process as well. But it can be helpful in generating details. It's not admissible in court, so any evidence given under hypnosis isn't admissible in court. So like the polygraph, like most profiling, it's not admissible in court, but it is used to direct the investigation. Hypnosis can also be used in treatment as well. Not just investigation, but in forensic treatment to maybe help uncover some things. Again, it's not treatment, but not necessarily treatment, but it can be helped to inform what areas to focus on for treatment. So another procedure is a cognitive interview. So this is really just about trying to, retrieve those memories through recall. So again, it's kind of creating that environment so cognitively that person is able to kind of better bring out these memories. So restating the context, so just verbally creating that environment, so verbally kind of talking about the event. Okay, so again, then maybe that person cognitively will go back there a bit, tell us everything, report everything that comes to mind. Because oftentimes there may be details that a person doesn't believe to be important, but the investigators may know that certain details are important. Reversing the order of the things, so maybe start at the beginning, go to the end. Now let's talk about it backwards. And the point of that, again, is just to kind of exercise those cognitive muscles, if you will. So So there may be details. So by reframing it in that way, it may pull out other details that weren't kind of, because normally we tell a story beginning to end. We do it backwards, it may uncover certain things. And it's also a good technique if you're writing a paper or something to kind of read it backwards, because our brain is working in a different way, and we may kind of pick out little things that we didn't notice going the other way. Changing perspectives. So, for example, a person is telling the story. So, yeah, I was on Main Street in Wolfville, and I this is what I saw. So then say, okay, so if you were across the street, or if you're looking at it from, if you're on a roof looking down, whatever, just changing that perspective. Again, the idea is to kind of pull out other details, right? So it's so similar. I mentioned the television technique with hypnosis, so it's kind of similar in a way to that. It's just now you're looking at it as an observer. So again, that might help moderate some of that emotional attachment you would have to the event. So if you're standing over here watching this, what are you going to see? Like, what do you see? What else is there? It's again, when we get into this emotional arousal, we focus, right? Like it's that, fight flight. Like we're focusing on whatever that stimulus is that we think is dangerous. So we might kind of block out some of this other stuff. We're still taking it in, but we're not focusing on it. So by changing perspective, you might get broader details. So the cognitive interview, they added to it, and now it's called the enhanced cognitive interview. Not the most creative name, but it is the cognitive interview enhanced. And really, this is some of the modifications. It makes it more sort of client-centered, I guess. So as opposed to just kind of coming in, answering the questions, and it's more about rapport building, which again helps with that relaxation, helps with moderating those emotions and feelings about the event. So it's very similar to client-focused counseling or client-focused therapy. It's about creating this, kind of rapport, this almost like counseling-like state. Tell me what do you want to talk about the event. So rather than those direct questions where the person may feel under pressure or have to answer this way, or maybe they're looking for specific information, talk about whatever you want to talk about, related to this. And using language that person, so this idea of witness compatible questioning. So, like with any profession, investigators have certain jargon, certain words they use, words that are, comfortable for them. We do it in psychology too. We have certain jargon that we'll use. But if you're talking to a witness who has experienced, a traumatic event, witnessing a crime is a traumatic event, using language, questions that are trauma informed, I guess. So we're not using this kind of specific jargon that we might be comfortable with. So asking questions in such a way that they're going to be comfortable. So it's really similar process as the cognitive interview, but adding more of this client focus or this witness focused elements to it. So cognitive interview, as far as bringing this information out, recalling this information, retrieving it from your long-term memory storage, tends to work. Police investigators oftentimes are hesitant to use it because it is time-consuming, especially this enhanced cognitive interview. So this idea of building rapport and taking time, giving people that space to retrieve it. As we know, like we're trying to remember something and we can't remember it. It's frustrating for us. So now we're adding another layer of emotions to it, which isn't helpful. Again, I think if you misplace something and, sometimes we'll say, oh, if I just stop thinking about it, I'll remember where I left my keys or something, right? If I just stop thinking about it, it'll come to me. And, which is true, because you're adding pressure to yourself. You're increasing that emotional arousal by putting more pressure on yourself to remember it, which then interferes with that recall. So, yeah. So taking the time, particularly if investigators are on a mission, they're on timelines, they want that information, then sometimes they can, accidentally put extra pressure on the witnesses to remember something when really that rapport building and making that person comfortable can be more helpful. So as I mentioned, the other side of memory retrieval is this idea of recognition. So not just pulling it out from your long-term storage, but seeing something that then, okay, now this reminds me of this, so now I remember. So the main technique used here is lineup. So maybe they're looking for somebody, they want a positive identification on a suspect. Then the lineup is usually what's done. So I think we can picture a lineup. We've seen them, we've seen them in media, there's different types of lineups, but where a witness will kind of look at people and say, yeah, it was number two, it was this person. So it can be done, like say with the people. It could also be done maybe voice or articles of clothing, this sort of thing. So say they find a shirt at the scene of a crime. Maybe they'll line up. They'll put put that shirt plus other shirts on the table and say, like, can you tell me which one the victim was wearing or the perpetrator or suspect was wearing? So with lineups, and that includes with the clothing as well. They have that suspected person. So again, everybody's innocent until proven guilty in court. So you have that person or object that the investigator, is that the thing that's under investigation or the person that's under investigation. And then you have the foils, which is everything else. So, so ones so you know to be innocent that aren't involved. Okay, very important, particularly for the court process, that the instructions are given fairly, that the foils, are fair. So, for example, if the suspect is a bald guy wearing an orange sweater, that everybody else in the lineup is a bald guy with an orange sweater. So if if that's not the case, then it's going to be very obvious that there's bias there, and they want the witness to kind of identify one person. So something that's used more often now is the photo lineup, whereby bring this up. Whereby photos are just they're either printed or put on an iPad or something. So similar to the kind of physical lineup where you would have the suspect's photo, but then you would have usually 6 or 8 photos of the foils, people who you know to be innocent or you presume to be innocent. So photos are used more often because they take that, it's less stressful for the witness because they're not standing in front of people. You can just show them these photos. So you have an iPad with pictures on it. Here you go. Pick out the person you saw, rob the bank. It's less time consuming because you don't have to gather people or things. Again, it's portable, so if I have it on an iPad or I have it printed on a piece of paper, I can visit the victim or witness in their home where they may be more comfortable. Maybe they're in the hospital, maybe they're at work, in jail, wherever. But you can take it to them as opposed to having somebody come to the police station and stand there in front of people, which again, can be stressful for people. Going into a police station for any reason can be intimidating to most people. There's no right to counsel for the suspect, so if you bring the suspect in, they have the right to retain and instruct counsel. And you see that, like if you see that in media and shows and movies, right? Where the lawyer is standing there, the defense lawyer standing there kind of watching the whole thing. You don't need to do that with photos. Um, Photos typically come from our driver's license photos, so from the provincial database. So they don't need anybody's permission. So maybe your photo has been used in a lineup. Um, Anybody who has a driver's license or an official government ID, they have your photo, so they could use that photo for this purpose. Photos are static, which means that then the witness can kind of spend a bit more time. They can look at it, they can study it, this sort of thing. And again, this anxiety piece, this emotional arousal. So again, if you witnessed a crime, traumatic, you get called, or you're a victim, maybe even more traumatic. You get called to the police station. Now you're standing there, and there's cops, and there's lawyers, and then there's maybe the perpetrator who did the offense. That's again very anxiety provoking situations. So by using a photo lineup, you can take it to somebody's home where they're comfortable at a time that's comfortable for them. Which again, that comfort, you're more likely to bring out more accurate information. You're more likely to retrieve what's in there without your brain fighting all of these other emotions and everything else. So there's different ways of doing the lineup, and most of these apply to the photo lineup as well. So simultaneous is when everybody's presented at once. So again, picture it if you've seen it in media. Everybody walks in, turn to the right, turn to the left, this sort of thing. And then the witness will pick out the person they believe responsible. That would be with photo, which just all the photos would be like one screen or one document. There's sequential where it's one at a time, and this tends to work better. So either that be one person walks out, leaves, next person walks in, leaves, or with photos it'd be like this photo first, then this photo, and so on. So that tends to work better because you're not necessarily just making these sort of comparisons. It's a bit more absolute, and the fact that you can look, and so in your long-term memory you may have the details there of what this person or thing, again it could be a thing, this could be cars or clothes or whatever, looks like. So you're taking away that sort of cognitive tension of kind of making these comparisons. There's a show up. This isn't used that often because there's a ton of bias around it. So this is when only one person or thing is shown to the witness. So is this the person who did it? Yes or no? Again, you can see where there's bias. So then if I was a defense lawyer, I would say, well, did you show them anybody else? So you can see how that wouldn't be preferred. And then there's the walk by. You may have seen this in movies. So this is where a person is taken to the location. So oftentimes when you see it in media, you'll see the witness kind of like hunched down in the back of a car, and they'll kind of roll up on a corner or in front of a building or something and say, point out the person who did it, type of thing. Again, it's similar to show up in a way. There, likely to be other people there. Again, but just think of that emotional arousal of the witness, right? You probably, and I'm certain you would, if you've watched any kind of like crime policing type shows, which if you're taking forensic psych, I'm sure you have. But yeah, you're crunched down in the back of a cop car, kind of peeking out the window, looking for this person who may have done something bad. It's going to be, you're going to be nervous, you're going to be anxious. You may not, be fully committed to doing this. So then again, those emotions, those feelings, these other cognitive processes are going to interfere with the retrieval of that information. So the person putting these lineups together really want to kind of make sure that it's as free of bias as possible. Um, so with the foils that are being used, so are they similar? Are you're not making the suspect stand out in sort of any unfair way. So whether that deals with like physical appearance, clothing, um, anything sort of related to their appearance, it all has to be similar, because otherwise you may make the suspect stand out in an unfair way, which then will likely show up later in court as part of the defense. And with instructions, very neutral. You don't want not leading the witness in any way. So keep those instructions very open, and really just allow for that sort of recall and retrieval to come out, and so that person picks the person who is responsible for whatever the event was. Okay. So that's just to kind of sum up this part of witnesses. We're going to continue the video talking about some considerations with children as witnesses, and again, including victims in that. So for anybody who's giving testimony, that might be a better way of saying it. So again, that process of understanding that process of memory. What's getting our attention? What are we noticing? And this is why, again, you've seen it on shows where oftentimes it's the tourists or somebody like new to town who notices more. So think about that. Like, we go through our day-to-day life just kind of zoning out stimuli around us, because we've seen this 100 times, right? Again, you can walk with your iPods in, through the Acadia campus and maybe not notice anything. I know I commute a lot and I'm on the highway a lot, and I will zone out. You don't notice things because you've done this trip so many times. So what are we actually paying attention to? What are we actually noticing? And then how is that being stored in our brain? Is there any interferences? So is it noise? Is it the use of substances? Is it, what is our own cognitive state when we're experiencing this event? And then once it's stored in our long-term memory, the investigators are going to use all of these techniques we're talking about to help bring that out. Okay, and the idea is to bring out the truth. Not a biased investigator. Will want that confirmation bias that's supporting evidence, but really it's about bringing out the truth. What are the facts? Okay. Excuse me. I'm going to talk a bit about some considerations around children, because we know developmentally children are different. Their perception is different. Kind of their whole cognitive processes are different. If you have studied developmental psychology, think of Piaget and the stages of cognitive development as we develop. So keep that in mind as we're talking about this. So historically, children were, how can I say this? I'll just say it the same way they say it. It's treated with skepticism. So if you think of back in the sort of 100 years ago, children weren't valued, I guess. Children were working in factories. If you know the history of the SPCA, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, it started as Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and Children. So there was no social service network to protect children. So this nonprofit that was looking after stray animals agreed to help look after kids as well. So this is before any child protection laws as we know them today. Children's opinions weren't valued. So even in parenting, right up to not that long ago, children should be seen and not heard. So what a child had to say wasn't regarded to have any sort of value. So it wasn't until the 70s when really, if you that really when our whole social structure changed. So the events of the 1960s, where there was radical social reform, radical social justice. I would say radical meaning big. There were social justice reforms. Um, then people started looking at kind of everything differently, right? People started looking at the role of children differently. This is when, again, our whole child welfare system started to change. There was more research happening around development of people, um, and there was just more significance given to the role of expert witnesses in court, the role of witnesses, all of these things. Historically, before that, you mean somebody could be convicted, um, just based on a police report. Um, there wasn't a lot of, I guess, research into, is what this person saw, is it truthful? Is this actually what they saw? You had one person who said, yeah, I saw them do this. Sometimes that was enough to get a conviction, particularly if you were from a marginalized community, you had a lower literacy rate, lower literacy level, that you couldn't really defend yourself. You were maybe confused by the court process. So many people were convicted just based off of, little evidence historically. Um, Yeah, and in the 70s, so when the social 70s, when 1970s and 80s, when there was, when the social services and the, child welfare system, it used to be controlled by churches, and then it went to the government. Um, and in part, that was due to a lot of historical abuses of children. So you think of, church-run orphanages, you think of residential schools. So in the 70s and 80s, the government started looking, saying, okay, there's more victims in these types of institutions. So then there's more victims, so then the system had to pay attention to it, and the criminal justice system had to pay attention to it because there was more people coming forward. So in that move from a church-run child welfare social service system to government-run, more of these things came to light. And many of them were children. So when it comes to recall, so remember the two parts, recall and recognition. So children can recall events, but the questioning has to be very developmentally appropriate. So meaning, understanding that the brain development, cognition, education, literacy, perception, all those things are different in children. But they still have the ability to recall whatever it is that went into their long-term storage, but it has to be, child-friendly type questioning. So using words that they understand, creating an environment that's comfortable for them. And we'll talk up some procedures in doing that here in a bit. Children have a difficult time describing people, right? So think about that. When you're younger, everybody looks big, everybody looks old. When you're younger, you can't tell the difference between a 25-year-old and a 35-year-old when you're 5 years old. And again, everybody's bigger than you, so they have a difficult time describing those physical characteristics of people. And children they typically want to please the adults. They want to say the right thing. They want to. They don't want to get in trouble. They want, and that's survival, right? Because you are reliant on the adults to feed you, to house you, to look after you, to give you pretty much everything. So children can be very easily kind of swayed into saying what they think you want to hear. So investigators have to be very cautious about how they're asking the questions, what they're saying, as not to kind of lead the child in a particular direction. So free recall. So this idea, we mentioned it before with the cognitive interview. So just tell us what happened. So just talk about whatever you want to talk about versus direct questioning. So asking, again, just direct questioning, asking direct, specific questions. Um, so with the free recall, kids tend to be as accurate as adults. So again, creating that safe, comfortable environment, say whatever you want to say. Um, but again, kids aren't noticing the same details as maybe adults. Again, just because of their where they are, where their development is, and maybe their knowledge of what certain things are. So again, as we get older, we might be able to say, okay, this is a Honda as opposed to a Toyota. A kid might just know it's a car. Um, so they're not giving that same sort of depth of detail as an adult would. Direct questions can be tough because again, it's this people pleasing part, right? Like I don't want to give the wrong. If you're forcing me into answering yes or no to a question, I don't want to say the wrong thing, right? So again, kids, they need us, they need adults to look after them, so they don't want to disappoint, they don't want to say the wrong thing. So those direct questions can be more difficult for young people. Um, how? So again, how is a form of of an open-ended question. You'd use it in counseling as well. It allows more of that free recall tend to be better. So ideally, the investigators would avoid those direct yes or no questions because you may not get the truthful answer. So as mentioned, this idea of social compliance and cognitive differences. So if you've done developmental psych, you've looked at Piaget and some others who really kind of dove into how children's cognition, well, how all of our cognition develops over time. That it is different. So if you look at some of the principles that Piaget talked about, like conservation and this sort of thing, like you can, depending on their age and where they are in development, I mean, they can have difficulty with numbers. They can have difficulty, again, as I said, with size of things. And then the social compliance thing. So that's what makes the direct questions difficult because they want to please, they want to say the right thing. So, so a couple of techniques here is a stepwise interview. So this is so essentially what this is. They're following. So it's kind of like it's a read like the read model, just in the way there are steps to follow. So starts with free narrative. Tell us what happened, what's going on. May use, and then kind of once they've told that, you move into sort of more direct, and it may not necessarily even be direct questions, but more directed in the sense of focusing on specific topics. So, and you would use aids in this. So you might use drawings, you might use, toys or stuffed animals, or you might use, drawings, something like that to help that. So again, picture that you may have seen this in some media. So think of a child has been a victim of some sort of sexual offense. So they'll, tell us what happened. So this person touched me here. Then they'll use dolls or stuffed toys. So then it gets more direct. So after they've had that kind of free narrative, again, creating this safe environment. So show me on the doll where this person hurt you. So that's the more direct piece. So going from free narrative into more direct, and that direct is using aids of some sort. So it could be draw me a picture, this sort of thing. Narrative elaboration. So this is I would say there's more nonverbal elements to it. So it's you're using pictures. So tell me about this, and it could also could be aids too. Again, it could be toys or something. So this is using them from the beginning, from the get-go. So it's like, let's break this down into a story. So depending on the age of the child, maybe they could draw. Maybe you're going to use you could use a program to kind of design a kind of a layout with photos or something like that. But tell me who was there. Like, where were you? Tell me what happened. Like, what was said. What was kind of, how did it end? What was the outcome, or what was yeah, how did this whole thing end? Um, so yeah, you're using these visual cues. Usually there are printed pictures, and you just kind of let the child kind of, so it's drawing on those, kind of that creativity. And if you know Piaget's stages, if children are in that symbolic stage, so it's usually like preschool, like beginning of school, like 4 to 6 time, around then. Um, no, say 4 to 5. They are more into the symbolism, so this is where there's more symbolic play. So like maybe a stick can represent something else. Maybe a box can represent a car or a table or a fort or something like that. They're more into this symbolic way of thinking. So using photos or drawing, sorry, they're more drawings than photos. Using these drawings can kind of help kind of draw upon where they are developmentally in that symbolic phase. And then the cognitive interview. So if you remember that from about 15 minutes ago, that this cognitive interview where we're using free recall to help really retrieve, like kind of work with the cognitive processes. So again, it needs to be developmentally appropriate um, to wherever that child is developmentally. What are they? How are they seeing the world? What is their perception? What is their level of education or knowledge or language? What words do they have? How advanced is their vocabulary with their development? So using that cognitive interview in a way that is adapted for young people, depending on where they are. Okay. All right, so hopefully this is helpful. Again, please reach out to me if you have any questions. Send me an email, or I'm happy to meet on Teams if that's helpful. But please reach out if there are any questions. Thank you.